I'm Julie Barkey with this Senate update. Your school, your needs. That's the idea behind legislation proposed by a group of Senate GOP members. At a news conference on Tuesday, they laid out their proposal, stating it would provide equity among school districts.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. We are here to present the GOP version of the K-12 funding proposal. What we have seen so far, in our opinion, has fallen flat and far short, and certainly less smart than what it could be. Thank you for coming, Senator Hand. Come on up. We were waiting for you, but we didn't want to keep the press waiting, so come on up. The GOP is proposing what we're calling Your School, Your Needs. Our proposal will send a burst of funding directly into your school's classrooms. What we have seen proposed by the Democrats either is nothing or at best a 1% increase in basic funding to the classrooms. What we are proposing is smarter than that. The Democrat plan comes with all kinds of strings, all kinds of mandated spending. There's lots of money involved, but it's not going into the classrooms that your schools and your children currently have. It's going into all kinds of new mandated spending. We think schools are smarter than that. We don't think that schools need to be told how to spend their money. We think the schools can serve your families and your children if we give them the resources to do it. And so that is what we are doing. The funding that we're using can be used in any way, in any local initiative to improve education, and does not have mandates and strings. The funds will also, the new funding that we're proposing, will be a student is a student, a dollar is a dollar. It will be absolutely equitable. The dollars will go to the students on a dollar per student basis. Every student gets the same funding regardless. Fairness and equity is a key component of what we are proposing here today. In 2016, we're talking $175 per student and $180 in 2017. What that amounts to is 3% and 3%. Far beyond what the Democrats have been talking about, either nothing or 1% in the press conferences that they've held to date. And a key part of that, again, is equity and no mandate. Your school can spend the money on the needs that they think are best or most important for their community and for your children. In addition to not tying new mandates, this bill will free the schools from future mandates. It will tell the schools that if there's a mandate coming down from the legislature in 2015, 2016, 2017, you can opt out of that if it doesn't fit what you think is best for your children and for your students. And so we are trying to do the best. We're trying to do the best for your schools, your needs. We will give them the resources they need to do the job. We won't tie their hands behind their back with mandates. And in fact, we will relieve them from some of the forthcoming mandates that if they don't think make sense for them, they will be able to back off and say, no, that doesn't make sense for us. Now, I'd like to hear a couple of words here from Senator Pratt and Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you. My name is Eric Pratt. I serve Scott County, so I have the communities of Prior Lake, Shakopee, and Jordan. I also had the distinct privilege of sitting on the Prior Lake School Board for 12 years. And I can tell you that this is the type of education financing that school districts want, school districts need. When I was on the board, we had the ability to set aside funds for special projects, and this bill will keep that option available to all districts going forward. But we also believe that education decisions and education is best delivered at the local level. Every school board member I met, every superintendent and administrator I met has the needs of the students first. And we know that the needs of students in Eden Prairie are different than the students in Ely. And so what this allows is local school boards to make those decisions to meet their local needs. But what's interesting about this is it also allows local school districts the funding and the resources to innovate. There are a lot of projects that school districts would like to take on. We've heard a lot about STEM. We've heard a lot about technology. This will allow school districts to meet the needs in the way that they deem most appropriate and most effective. And so I'm proud to be a part of this bill, and I'm glad that at least the Senate GOP is going forward with recognizing that we trust our local boards and our local superintendents, and I'll let Senator Chamberlain make some comments on that.
And I just want to add one thing. Come on up, Roger. Before Roger talks, I failed to mention one other provision in the proposal, and that is the lockbox provision. We don't want to mandate to schools how they will spend their money, but we want to give them the ability to choose and say, we will commit to spending money for certain things. And the lockbox provision in this proposal gives school boards the ability and the authority to take a chunk of money, and if they deem that breakfast for every child is important to their students, they can put the money in the lockbox, set it aside, and it can't be touched for any other purpose. If they deem that pre-K is essential for their students and their community, they can set that money aside, put it in the lockbox. It can't be negotiated away. It can't be spent for other purposes. If they deem that facilities improvements are the top priority or one of the top priorities for their district, they can put the money in the lockbox for that purpose, set it away, and it can't be used for anything else. It allows that local control, that local prioritization, the ability to customize the spending rather than have the state say, this is what you will do with these funds. And so I failed to mention that. I just want to jump in there.
Good morning. Again, this proposal is about trust and about priorities. Our proposal acknowledges and celebrates the abilities, talents, and passions of parents, professional educators, and the communities in which they live. We will do that by providing the relief, as is mentioned earlier, directly where it's needed most, in the classrooms, per pupil. A kid is a kid is a kid. Equity throughout the state. And you contrast that with, as was mentioned earlier, the governor and the Democrats' proposal. Nothing to 1%. Along with that, they did choose to increase the budget for the Department of Education by 33%. What their proposal will do will cause our local schools and districts to continue cutting money from the classroom, far from adding to the classroom where it's most needed, where the parents and the educators said they need it. Their proposal, 0 to 1%, and the mandates and the strings will create continued cuts in the classroom to those educators and increase burdens on those districts. The best ideas for education, we believe sincerely, come from the communities, from the parents, from those professionals doing this. White Bear Lake, Crookston, Worthington, those communities, it's closest to them, that's where the decision should be made. And in contrast, not from the government, politicians, or bureaucrats from either St. Paul or Washington, D.C. We've seen that for decades, and it's not working. Interestingly enough, Commissioner Casilius said as much this morning in her comments. When pressed on the comments, she simply said, these decisions, why is there success, Commissioner? Because of the local communities. That's where it comes from. So I would challenge them to look at the proposal and see what we're doing. So we deeply, sincerely care about these ideas, these proposals, our communities, and the professionals that teach our kids. So that these ideas are ideas that work, they will work, they have worked. So thank you very much. And we'll, of course, take questions. Thank you.
I'm Mary Kiefmeyer, State Senator. My school district, one of my school districts, is the lowest funded school district from the state of Minnesota. And when I visit with them, they are constantly seeing that children in other school districts are funded at twice the dollar amount as their students. You can imagine that is not a very pleasant situation to be in. And when we have heard superintendents, we have heard teachers, we listen to parents, listen to students, not once did they say, give us another mandate. Not once did they say, tell us what to do. Each time, these were caring people. When they testify in front of a committee, we commend them. They do wonderful things. We say how good they are, from the commissioner on down. And yet then when we pass a bill, we do the opposite. We tie their hands with mandates, and we treat them as if they don't know how to teach, like they don't know how to manage their own local school. So what we are doing in our proposal is actually putting feet and a real proposal that respects superintendents, teachers, parents, and puts the student at the center of our proposal, and each one of them are different throughout the state, and this frees up those qualified people to take care of their individual students. So I'm pleased to be here today and support this proposal. Thank you.
So if there are any questions, we'd certainly be willing to answer anything that you have.
Hi, Senators Ricardo Lopez here with the Star Tribune. Does anything in this legislation address the current funding formulas? I mean, the disparities in funding across districts often are because of different types of students, whether it's English language learners or, and some districts have the ability to levy, to go to the voters and pass a levy to raise more money for their district. Is there anything in this legislation that addresses that?
Well, every district has the opportunity to go to voters to raise money. Every district has that ability. There are some districts that have the ability to levy the alternative facilities levy without going to the voters. This district doesn't address that, either increasing or decreasing that ability. As far as equity and funding, this bill, the money that we are proposing is off the formula. And for those of you that aren't education funding geeks, what that means, if it's on the formula, there's a couple of dozen what we call categoricals. And every time you put money on the formula, those categoricals are engaged. And that means that schools like, quite frankly, Minneapolis get more money than schools like Cambridge or Wilmer or wherever the case might be, because the categoricals kick into the formula. This proposal spends the money on a per-student basis, not on the basic formula, but as a basic needs revenue. So a student is a student, a dollar is a dollar, absolute, complete equity. So it's a step in the direction towards equitable funding.
Are you talking, Senator, about the entire education budget or just just additional dollars?
The additional dollars.
All additional dollars are off the formula?
The additional dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can only, you know, you can only eat a whale one bite at a time.
Well, the objection will still stand, though, albeit probably a smaller objection in terms of rural districts declining enrollment versus, you know, inner city Minneapolis, inner city St. Paul, where the kids need some additional help. The opponents will argue that they may need this additional money a bit more than other districts, whereas some suburban districts, you know, like Senator Pratt's, are maybe in a little bit better shape. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't have a full school district run, but when you compare 3% to 0%, I think they'll be happy.
Mm-hmm. What does it total up to each year with this?
It's slightly less, but roughly equivalent to what the Democrats have proposed. It's just that we're spending this money smarter. It's $450, I think.
Yeah.
I see Senator Han is here. Senator, you were pretty critical of the governor's education proposals, saying they contain not a scintilla of reform. Now,
that's right, a scintilla.
One could argue that this is more of the same, again, throwing money at the schools. So how do you explain the difference?
Well, we have always, and I think it's testament to the concern that Republicans have for education when you see so many of us here. There are some of us, me included, that got into this whole business because of concerns for education. And I'll tell you from my perspective, it's not always about the money. It's not about how much money goes here or there, but it's about who makes decisions, who gets to decide how that money is used. And that's really what I think this bill gets at, is trying to recognize that there is a trust element here, that parents who vote for school board members, and they're all elected just like we are, they are there to do their best to make sure the monies that they have are used to educate the kids in that district. What we see happening is that we put mandates and controls because some legislator has an idea about something or other, and we say everybody should do that, and so we tie the money to those preferred solutions. What we're saying here is let's stop doing that. Let's try to make this very complex education finance system a little more straightforward and really recognize that it is the local folks, the families, and the local school board officials who can make and will make good decisions about addressing the kind of problems that we see endemic in K-12. So it's not a prescription of here's how you solve that achievement gap, but I tell you, I believe that if you put the power in the local districts, they will figure this out. And that's what this is about.
Senate Education Chair Meager has stated that there's likely going to be some money put on the formula by the time session ends. He's just not sure how much. Have you had conversations with him? How do you think he would support not this whole amount, something in this realm?
Well, I appreciate that Senator Uyghur now is talking about additional funding on the formula as an afterthought. Their press conference, what is it, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, had nothing. If it was a top priority, that would have been part of their press conference. Apparently, they're having second thoughts and going, oh yeah, forgot about that. That's unfortunate, but it's good that we are hearing that conversation. What we don't want, what this proposal is about, is not tying that money to mandates. We saw that in the last K-12 budget. The vast majority of the money that came in to the E-12 budget was tied to directed spending, mandated spending. Here's the money, here's how you're going to spend it. What we are talking about here in this proposal is letting your schools and your children spend the money in the way that they believe is most efficient and most effective for them. And that, I think, is going to be the key, and that is the key part that I hope we can get into the K-12 budget or the E-12 budget. And as far as the reforms, I don't want to give away any secrets here, but you will see some. This is the GOP education budget proposal. You will see some education proposals, and I know Senator Han, and he and I have had discussions, is talking on about something very significant, looking at Minneapolis and the significant problems that we have there with graduation rates, with the achievement gap, and it is probably a nation-leading proposal that will come out when we have that ready and prepared, but it's not part of the budget proposal. It's going to be part of the policy and reform proposal. So you will see some big things coming on that front, but it's not part of the budget proposal.
Even though, Senator, it may not be part of the budget proposal, do Republicans on the whole overall budget, the votes need to come with reform. Does reform need to come with this whole thing in order to get Republican votes? Senator Hand's nodding.
Yes, I mean, when the E-12 bill comes, the E-12 committee is a mix now of policy and budget. And so when that bill comes to the floor, it is going to have both policy and hopefully reforms and budget. And so the anticipation, the expectation is that we will see some significant reform. Well, this proposal itself does have reforms. The fact that we're taking hundreds of millions of dollars off the basic formula and making it equitable and fair is dramatic. I mean, that, for those that follow E-12 funding, that is a dramatic reform and a dramatic change. So this is not void of reform. It's just that we don't have all of the other policy reforms that we're going to be proposing.
But probably the most controversial reform has to do with the teacher tenure provisions. Now, I understand that you folks don't have the majority in the Senate, but your colleagues in the other chamber do. So maybe, Senator Hand, you're nodding your head a lot. Do you want to come over and talk about how this is going to figure into the whole?
Well, I think there is a separate bill. I believe Senator Bonhoeff might be one of the authors, maybe the chief author, that matches up with the House proposal. And that is an element of, I think, what we call reform. But to us, I think the biggest reform is about who makes the decisions about what happens in the classroom. Who does that? Is it some bureaucracy in St. Paul or in Washington, D.C.? Is it a bunch of politicians in St. Paul who are far removed? Or is it the people who are elected locally to serve the parents in their community? Who makes the decisions? That is the biggest reform that we've been trying to get at in a number of ways, is to empower local districts to truly be independent, as their name implies, to be able to make decisions. We tie the funding up, as we tend to do with mandates, that just restricts the ability of local districts to be able to decide, well, we want to do this instead. How do we do that? If we find a way around it. This frees them up to make choices about education that make sense to them. And they're elected officials, just like we are. We shouldn't say, well, because we're in the state legislature, we're smarter or better or more capable. Those folks are capable as well. We need to recognize that. That's what this reform is about. And if it doesn't work, their local voters can hold them accountable. Anything else?
Just one last quick comment from me, is that there's a flip side to this. Not only do they, and I want to just remind you this, not only are they not putting money in the classroom where it's most needed, but the continued mandates will draw money from the current school budgets. And their budget will cause the schools to go out, work on more levies from local taxpayers, and or reduce budgets in the classroom. So it's not just they're not giving anything here and no reforms, but continued mandates and pressure on the schools to drive up levies and or make cuts in the classroom. That is what their proposal does on the other side. So it's important to remember that piece of it. It does nothing for the classroom. It drives their particular agenda, and there's no reform in it. This is true reform.
I've got one last question. So I'm just tripling the 1% increase in the governor's budget, and if that's a fair way of doing it, I got $523 million for a 3% increase in each of the 2 years. Is that number accurate?
The numbers, as we've crunched them, come in a little lower than that, but that's a ballpark.
Okay. So, I mean, that's more than the governor is proposing overall for education. What would you say to the argument that, you know, a lot of Republicans want to give a big chunk of this surplus back to voters, and this would be more than half of that projected $1 billion surplus?
Who said the money's got to come out of the surplus? A few years ago, when the GOP was in charge, we had a $6 billion deficit. Most of you that were around here remember that. At that time, we gave schools a 1% and a 1%. With a $6 billion deficit, we put more money into the basic formula. It didn't come out of any kind of surplus. It's about prioritization. Where are we going to spend the money? How are we going to spend the money? What's the best way to spend the money? There's no need that this money come out of the surplus. It can. It depends on the budget priorities and the final product that comes out of the legislature. And in the Senate, obviously, the Democrats are in charge of that. In the House, the Republicans are in charge of that. And the governor has to sign off on whatever agreement is made. Also, a key point in that is the governor's proposal, and quite frankly, by extension, probably what the Senate is looking at when they're talking about pre-K, puts off nearly $500 million in spending into the tails. They don't spend the money now because it looks bad in the budget. It's spent in the tails. Hundreds of millions of dollars that they would be committing the next legislature to spending, where we say, no, if your school district wants to do pre-K, here's the money. Go ahead and do it. If it doesn't make sense for your district, then spend it on more teachers, spend it on whatever makes sense for your district. And then I also want to jump on what Senator Chamberlain said with the proposals that we've seen so far really aren't even fully funded. Commissioner Caselius was in front of the E12 committee a few days ago, I think it was last week, and the governor's proposal for pre-K, even by putting off $500 million into the tails, does not cover the cost for the upcoming budget. Only half of the cost is covered in that proposal. So where's the rest of that money come from? It gets stolen right out of other classrooms. They're assuming that the schools can absorb a cross-subsidy, that they can take money out of current resources to spend and pay for what the governor wants to do with new mandated spending. That's why we've got this proposal. It's better, faster, smarter. If you want to spend that kind of money, do it smart. Don't tie it to mandates, and don't require that schools spend $1 for $1 when you give them an extra $1. That's not smart, and that's not going to help your kids, it's not going to help my kids, it's not going to help your schools, and it's not going to help your classrooms.
So, Senator, again, the funding increase is how much for the biennium?
Well, it's 3% and 3% each year. That is on a per student basis, 175 and 180. The aggregate dollar figures, what I've been told, is like 455. They might be slightly different than that, but
455 for the biennium?
yes, for the biennium.
Okay, and then this is one-time money. This would be a one-time gift.
Well, it's one time. It's one time off the formula.
Budget cycle.
Off the formula one time, and it would revert back to current law, and then it would go back onto the base. And at that point, we would have a discussion about equity, put it back onto the base, and that's the point of this proposal, is to open the door to funding equity and try to turn the rudder on the giant ship, which is K-12 funding, and get it moving.
To have no tails, it would just have to be one time, 455 one time, right? Yeah, it has no tails. So it's just for 2-year budget cycles, and then you go back to square one.
Well, I believe the way the bill is written, that it would build in future years, that money would revert back into the base. But we're doing it as, for this biennium, off of the basic funding so that we have equity. And then under the way it's written, I think it would revert back into the base, but at that point then, we would have the conversation about, is that a smart way to do it or not smart way to do it? And school districts would feel the difference if we did not maintain the status quo and if we let it roll back into the base.
So it does have tails and it goes back into base?
Yes, yeah. Just like any K-12 funding bill typically does.
Senator Bill Weber from Senate District 22, and I just want to make one comment regarding, we were sort of lumped in as rural school districts, and Senator Dames and I represent some of the deep rural areas of Minnesota, about lumping us in with Minneapolis, the Twin City districts, as far as fairness of needing more money. Trust me, in rural Minnesota, we're used to getting shortchanged in the funding formula. And so the fact that we actually get the same dollars per student as every other school district across this state is vitally important to us. And so I just want to comment that that is the basic fairness issue as we talk about education funding in Minnesota. Because whether we're talking about facilities, whether we're talking about money getting into the classroom, we traditionally have always been shortchanged. And this actually says, as our sign says, a student is a student, and you know, we need to consider that. And so as a result of that, we're more than happy to accept this this proposal on behalf of our schools, because it will be the first time in a long time that they can claim any level of fairness in the education process.
And I just wanted to take a quick moment to address, this is permanent. This is permanent money on the formula. Now, how it's accounted for may change after the end of biennium. But what I hear from school districts and what I hear from my former peers is that they need stable, reliable funding that they can count on. And so that's what we're bringing to the table. And so if that's a tail, it is a permanent increase to the base, and it provides that stability that school districts are looking for.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm going to jump in. Karen Housley. Not only is our proposal better, faster, and smarter, it's also simple, and not always do you get simple out of legislators. I'm here, your school, your needs, and just by fluke, I got lucky enough that members of our Stillwater School Board and Forest Lake are here today, and they're all smiles in the back of the room. I haven't had a chance to tell you guys yet, so this is for you. You have the freedom now, so thank you. If you want to interview them, they're happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.